If you've been finding breadth first versus depth first concepts really confusing in computer science, I wanted to make this video to help you out. Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video, I'm going to go through a C# example where we try traversing a file folder hierarchy. And I really like taking really practical approaches to this kind of stuff because for me personally, that was one of the best ways that I could learn. As soon as these things start getting more mathematical and more theoretical, they were seemingly simple and they got really convoluted very fast. But taking something hands-on, very practical, really made it solidified for me. If that sounds interesting, just a reminder to subscribe to the channel and check out that pinned comment for my courses on DomeTrain. With that said, let's go over to Visual Studio and check out this example. On my screen right now, I have an example of a depth-first iteration approach to going through a file folder hierarchy. Now, when we think about this, the variations that we have are going to be a depth-first approach versus breadth-first. When we think about depth first, we want to go deeper before we start going wider. And of course, breadth first is going to be the exact opposite. I think when we go to print out the results of these things, it should make it much more obvious in terms of how they're functioning. And that's exactly why I like to use sort of what seems like a more practical example to doing things. Now, we're going to start with the depth first approach here. And then what we're going to do after is look at the breadth first approach. And we're going to compare because they're almost identical, but we're going to be swapping out a data structure to make these things work. So let's start by checking out the algorithm. You can see that I have this class declared here starting at line 5, and it just has a run method inside of it, which is going to take a root directory for us to look at. So on my hard drive, I just have a folder that has some course material in it from DomeTrain that I've created, and what we're going to do is start off by checking to make sure that we're not dealing with an empty directory. So just sort of an edge case to look for at the beginning. And from there, what we're going to do is start by putting our top level folder, so this root folder we're looking at, we are going to push that onto a stack. And I've declared that stack right here on line 15. And if we look closer at line 16, I've also created my own data structure here to hold a record. And I'm just going to explain this very briefly. What I'm doing is I'm taking the sort of the path that we're dealing with. Now, actually, it's probably easier if I just jump down to it down here. But if we look at entry, I take the path. So this is the full path we're dealing with. Then I'm also just storing the name for simplicity. And then I'm going to store the level. And when we think about the level, this is sort of just how many folders we're deep inside of our search. So if I scroll all the way back up here, the idea is that if we're starting at the root, we are 0 levels deep. You don't need to track the level. It's just that when I go print this stuff out to the console, I wanted to make it very obvious visually how deep we are. So that's just why I'm using it that way. Now, the idea here is that we're going to be looping through our stack full of these entries, which are going to represent the different folders that we have. And we want to keep looping until we're done. So once that folder collection, so the stack in this case, once that's completely emptied out, we've done and we've finished traversing everything. The way that we start making progress through our stack that we're dealing with here is that we need to pop off the top level of that collection of folders. And the first time through this, we've only put the root onto this stack. So if you visualize it, we have our empty stack. We've now put the root on top of it, and now we're popping that off. So we've just put something on and taken it right back off, but that's because it's just kicking off our algorithm that we're looping through. So we've now taken that thing back off the top, and we're now looking at the entry that's representing the root folder. This is just going to calculate a basically empty string the first time through because the level is 0. So if we have 0 spaces, which is what this is saying, it's just going to be an empty string the first time through. So that means when we go to write out to the console, this is going to be empty because there is no indentation followed by the name of the folder. So we should see, in this case, if I scroll back up, the first thing we should see is courses printed out into the console. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to ask for all of the files at that current depth of our search. If there are no files, basically this call right here on line 25 will return no items. If there are some, we will be able to iterate through them and print out all of the file names with the indentation right in front. And you'll notice I've calculated the indentation again right above, so it's 1 level deeper than the folder depth. That way, of course, if we're printing out all of the files, they look like they're indented inside of the folder just for a visual representation. Hopefully, so far, pretty straightforward. So again, if there are no files, this will basically do no work because it's empty. And if there are files just in that current level that we're looking at, we'll print those out. From there, though, what we're going to do is we're going to ask that directory, not for the files now, but for the other folders that we have within it. Again, just at that top level or the current level that we're at. So if there are any folders, then we're going to make a new entry and we'll add one to the level that we're currently at. This way it seems like the folder is one level deeper when we go to print it out. And then from there, we're going to push that entry onto our stack. And keep in mind that when we're thinking about a stack data structure, every time you add something or you push it onto the stack, it now goes to the top of the stack. So every single time you add one more thing onto the top, and every time you pop something off of the stack, you start removing it from the top. A queue, which we'll see later, works the exact opposite way. So a stack is what we're currently using, and hopefully if that makes sense visually when you're adding things on, they stack on top, and when you remove them, they pop off of the top. Just a visual representation as we're going through this. That means that as we're adding things onto here, basically the first folder that we come across will get added onto the stack, and if there's another folder, we will go put that on top of the stack. So just again, try to have this visualization, and as you're going through this exercise and you take this code and you try it out for yourself, I would highly recommend you get a pen and paper and try drawing it out. Because this kind of thing, if it's not really registering and clicking with you, I would say having pen and paper and trying to go through the code and draw out what each iteration of the loop is doing, I think personally it makes a tremendous difference in trying to solidify your understanding. Let's continue on and see what happens once we go back up to the top of the loop. Before we continue on, this is just a quick reminder that I do have courses available on DomeTrain. If you're just getting started in your programming journey and you want to learn C#, you can head over to DomeTrain. I have a Getting Started in C# course. It's approximately 5 hours of content taking you from absolutely no experience to being able to program in C#. And after that, I have my Deep Dive course, which will take you to the next level with another 6 hours of content so that you can start building basic applications. Head over to DomeTrain and check it out. Let's head back to the video. So we would check to see, okay, is our collections, or our stack in this case, does it still have anything inside of it? And if we happen to have folders from the previous iteration, all of those folders will now get added into the stack. So we will check and say, hey, look, yep, there was at least something added, and then we're going to go ahead and pop it off. From here, we just repeat this entire process. And what should be happening is every time we come across files at a particular folder level, we'll print them all out. And that's what this loop is doing right here. So this part that I'm highlighting is responsible for always printing out the files in the folder. This part here that I'm highlighting from line 21 to 22 is responsible for always printing out the current folder. And then this part that I'm highlighting down here is responsible for basically getting ready the next set of folders that are in our current directory. So each part of this code has a particular purpose. Again, what I'm highlighting here gets the next set of directories. What I'm highlighting here is going to print all the files of the current directory. And what I'm highlighting here from line 21 to 22 is just printing out the name of the directory that we're currently at. And to wrap it all up, this while loop, so on line 18, that's checking the condition, as well as the pop part on line 20, so folders.pop, these two things together allow us to basically keep iterating and popping off the next iteration that we have to go looking at. If we scroll back up to the top, you can see that I currently have this one all set up. Like I said, it's pointing at a folder that I have with some course information. I'm going to go ahead and run this. It's super quick, so if I press play, we'll see it pop up. And now that it's finished, again, very quick, I'm going to move it over on one part of my screen, scroll all the way to the top. There's a lot of stuff in here. It's just a lot of compiled code and some garbage. So I'm going to pull up my file folder explorer and we're going to see if we can go through them together. Unfortunately, on the right-hand side, when we're looking at the file folder structure, I'm unable to zoom in effectively. So if there is some text that's a little bit hard to read, hopefully my editor can zoom in for us a little bit, but we should be roughly okay to go. So at the top level, you can see that I'm starting in the courses folder. So that's what we see up at the top. And in my bar right at the top here, you can see that it says courses. From there, DomeTrain is the next folder we see, right? So if I go in, there's DomeTrain. If I go in one more, there's Reflection, which is what we see here. And now this is the first time that we're going to see sort of a deviation because we see code and videos here, but just videos here. And if we think about what's going on here, so I didn't prove it and I didn't explain it, but when we're asking for the files and folders, it's up to the file system in this case to give us back the files and folders in whatever order it wants to give us those back. I didn't ask specifically for them to be in alphabetical order, but we might assume in this case that it did give them back to us in alphabetical order. And if we think about that stack, remember, so if it gave us code, it's going to put code onto the stack, and then it gives us videos. We're going to put videos onto the stack. The next time we go through that iteration, what's at the top of the stack? Videos. And if we have a look on the left-hand side, that's exactly what we popped off of the stack. So if I go into videos, we're going to have this same pattern again, right? So you see edited and raw, but what do we have on the left-hand side? Just raw. And it's the same reason because we're going to keep going deeper. So I'm going to go into raw. And then I have 9.0. So it's going to go into here. If you think about this one, it's a little confusing because if it was alphabetical, you might say, well, Nick, why the heck did it pick 9 instead of 11 here? And it's because 11 is a bigger number, but alphabetically, 9 is greater than 1. So that's why it's going to 9, right? So let's do that. And then 9.2, same idea here. And finally, we're going to get into this folder. Okay, so that's that. And then what's going to happen is we're going to say, great, we've reached the end here. There's no more folders. Makes sense. We'll go back out. And what was the other one that we had queued up onto the stack? Well, we popped off 9.2, but 9.1 is now the next thing on the stack, which is why if we go into here and we see it on the left, now we get these two videos, which are on my screen. But at this point, there's no more folders in here that it queued up. If I go back up to this level, there's also no more folders that it would have added onto the stack from here, so it has to go back up one more now. And again, thinking about the order that it would have placed these onto the stack, this is probably a lot more obvious if you're stepping through the debugger and looking at it as it's adding the things onto the stack, but I wanted to show you the visual representation practically. I didn't want to go draw like a funny tree structure and stuff. I wanted to show you hands-on what this file folder structure looks like. But you can see that 7.0 is the next one. And if I scroll a little bit more, it's very much like what we just saw with the 9.0 folder, but this time there are 3 folders inside of here. And that's why you see these ones printed out. Hopefully so far that's making sense. And that's going to be how we do a depth-first iteration approach to file folder hierarchies. I'm going to go ahead and stop this, and we're going to swap it out for the breadth-first approach. So I have this other implementation. What I'm going to do is keep this one expanded. I'm just going to jump down to this code here. Now I don't have them side by side, but I just want to call out, unless you have supervision and super good memory, that these are almost the exact same in terms of code setup. But there's one fundamental difference, and I hinted at it earlier. It's going to start here on line 52, and that's because we're not using a stack anymore. Instead of a stack, we're going to use a queue. This is because the queue data structure works basically backwards from the stack. With the stack, we were adding things onto the top, and then we were removing things off of the stack. When we're queuing them up, we're going to be taking them out in the order that we were putting them in. So the exact opposite of a stack, as I just mentioned. But that means we use the inQueue method, and you can see that on line 53 and 73, and then dequeue. So instead of push and pop, it's inQueue and dequeue. Otherwise, this code is the exact same. And that means that we can basically take this exact same algorithm. I don't necessarily have to walk you through it in terms of this code here, but if we keep in mind that what's going to be happening is that enqueuing and dequeuing works in the opposite order from push and pop, that means that we're going to be traversing things in a different order. Let's go ahead and run this one now. I'm going to press play. And already it looks a little bit different, but let me scroll up to the top here. If you remember what we were just looking at, and if you don't, feel free, rewind the video, go back, have a look at it, right? I don't expect that this is necessarily going to be something that, you know, sticks out in your mind perfectly, and I don't think that's normal for anyone, so don't worry about it. But if I go all the way back to the Dome Train folder, right, so we'll go to courses actually. Courses is at the top in both of these cases, right? Going into courses, we have one single folder, it's Dome Train, and the same with Reflection. So far, so good. But what's different about this one now? Well, it's going to go into code next. Now, I don't want you to hyper focus on the fact that it went into code instead of videos necessarily, because maybe the sort order is different, whatever it happens to be. That's not really the important part. But what is important is that it's going to go into code, right? And what it did was, once it's in code, if we scroll down a little bit, what it did was it went to print out get ignore and reflection, right? The solution file. But look at all these folders in here. Why didn't it go print those out? Kind of interesting. Well, it's because it's doing a breadth first approach. So it said, I need to go into this code folder and print out the files. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all of these folders onto the queue. The stack was adding them as the next thing that it needs to pop off. But with the queue, they go on to basically the end of the queue. They have to go wait their turn in the order that they were put in. These ones weren't added before. If I go back up, they weren't added before the videos one. The videos folder is the next folder we have to go do. But if we think about it, all of these folders that I'm highlighting here came after videos. So keep that in mind as I go back up. So now we're going into videos, which is what we see here. Notice there are no folders inside of the video printout. If I jump into here, you'll see, right? There's no folders that it's printing out. In fact, there's no files. Very interesting, right? Well, where the heck are these coming from? Where's this .git coming from? So let me go back and go into code. Well, here's .git. It might be kind of hard to see on this left side here, but .git is interesting because it might look like it's a file, but technically it's this folder, and it's really hard to see, but that dot is actually the character position sort of indented one level before commit message. So that means we went into here. We went into the .git folder, and then you'll notice it printed out all of the files. So I'm going to highlight on the left here as well. These files are the same list. Sorry, I missed one because that .vs folder is misleading. But these are the 6 files that it has printed out on the left. And again, it did not print out the folders right away. In my opinion, it's really confusing to read the left-hand side because you might expect that you see the folders at the same level. But every time it finds a folder, it goes and adds it to the queue. Again, that folder has to wait its turn to be the next folder to come off of the queue. Hopefully you can see that this pattern still continues, and if I go back up, because now we've printed out all the files, we've added all of these folders onto the queue, well, the next thing on the queue would be this .vs folder. And how many files do we have in here? 0. But how many folders do we have? 2 get added to the queue. But that's why .vs, again, kind of hard to read here. Sorry because the dot's small, but there's no files printed out underneath .vs because there simply aren't any here. At this point, what I figured I would do is, because we've already walked through some of the output and we've seen that we can compare both breadth and depth first, I was just going to go ahead and put a breakpoint inside of this part here in this while loop, and maybe I'll actually put it right after we dequeue things. And then I was going to put maybe I'll just run it and we can set another breakpoint as it makes sense, but I wanted to show you what's happening as it goes through from the code perspective. Okay, so starting things off in this approach here, we're going to look at the first folder that's coming off of the queue, and that's going to be the root that we put in, which is the courses folder that we're starting with. So that's the first one that we see, and I just wanted to show you as we start walking through, again, calculating the indentation. This is just kind of to print out the console, doesn't really matter. But how many files did we have in the courses folder? There should be none. So if I step over this, you'll see it jumped over the loop because there simply are no files. But there are folders, and there's only one, so we should go into here. That directory we see is the Dome Train folder inside of the courses folder. So it's going to go added onto the queue, and that's it. The first pass through here, it's really not that exciting, right? Didn't find any files. The folders collection, this queue, we already emptied it, and then we added one more thing. So the next time through, it's basically the exact same thing, except we're one level deeper in the items we're tracking. So if I pull out current folder, it's now that Dome Train folder. And if we have a close look, it says level 1 instead of level 0. But it's going to look basically the exact same aside from how far it's printing in the console. How many files are in that folder? There's 0. It's going to skip over this part again, right? And how many folders are in here? There's 1. So it's going to look the exact same in terms of the flow that we just saw. So let's go ahead and add that. This is now the reflection folder. Okay, the next time through, what's it going to look like? Probably pretty similar. So it's kind of boring at the beginning, but we're going to pull off the current folder. We're now at level 2. We're looking at the reflection folder, stepping through a little bit. How many files are in there? Let's find out. None. So far, we haven't even gone into that block of code to go print out the files. There simply aren't any. And that queue, we've been emptying it every time we add something back on. But let's see, how many folders are inside of this reflection folder? So if we go in, one we have here is going to be called code. So we're going to add that. And it looks like now there's 2 folders. So this is where it starts to become a little bit more interesting, right? We've now added code, and now this new one here is videos. Before we move on to the next iteration, if we look at our folders collection here, there are 2 entries. We'll see code is at position 0 and videos is at position 1. And we have to think that this is not like a stack. Whatever was added in first is going to be the thing that comes out first. Okay? So they come out in the order that they were put in, which means if I go to the next iteration here, we go to DQ, we end up getting the code folder. So again, if we check the folders collection, there's only one thing, and of course, it's still the videos folder that's left over there. Let's step through now. So how many files are in this code folder? It looks like we found our first file. Okay, so we'll step through. This file is called the .gitignore file, so I'll write that out. Looks like there's another file. We'll go print that out. That's a solution file. Print that out. So there's 2 files that we added in. And notice that when we do this, we are not printing the directories as we find them, right? Because this loop that finds the directories is not writing them out. Every time we do an iteration of the loop, and starting from this outside part, right, every time we enter an iteration, that's the thing responsible for printing the directory that we're at. So how many folders are in this one? We end up having .git, .vs. Okay, so there's a bunch of folders in here. Now we have a 10.0, and if I keep going, there's a whole bunch. Okay, so I'm going to press F5. I guess before I do that, a little quiz for you is, can you recall, maybe you need to rewind, it's okay. I just added a bunch of folders in here. Was this folders collection empty before we started doing that? And the answer is no. But which one is it? And turns out, you can probably see it if you're looking closely on the screen before I hovered over it, but it's going to be that videos folder. The code folder that we were just in, we queued up a whole bunch of other folders, and if I hover over it, we added 20. There's 20 folders that got added into here, and we just pulled off the videos one. That means once we finish this videos folder, however many things it's going to add here, we won't even get to them until we get through all 20 folders that are currently in the queue. Hopefully you can see how that pattern makes sense, because I think that sometimes when people think about this traversal approach, that sometimes the depth-first approach makes a little bit more sense because you're kind of seeing things in an order that you might expect a little bit more. However, if you are curious, I do highly recommend that you try an algorithm like this so you can see the difference. If you want, you can check out this code. However, it's probably just as easy if you try thinking through it on paper and seeing, which ones you should be printing first. You could even ask an LLM to try drafting some pseudocode for you. I would recommend that if you're going to ask an LLM for any help, that you don't just copy the code blindly, but I think if you ask it to code up some of the structure, or even if you do get it to do the code for you, make sure that you're asking it questions to understand why. Because the whole point that you're probably watching this video is that you wanted to understand it a little bit better. What's the point of doing that if you're not actually going to try and understand it? Because if you just needed the code, you could have asked an LLM or taken it from Stack Overflow or something. If you're trying to understand things, you do need to take the time to try them out and walk through them. If that means taking a pen and paper or stepping through the debugger a whole bunch, or both, please do that because it will help solidify your understanding. In this video, we got to see 2 different approaches to iterating over file folder hierarchies. And we started off by looking at depth first, and then I went into sort of a visual representation so you could truly see the folders and files on my disk. And then we did the same thing with the breadth first approach. In the end, we only went and debugged the breadth first approach so you could see what it looks like as we're stepping through different iterations in the debugger. But of course, I do recommend that if you want to see the depth first one, try it out for yourself and see if you can follow along just like we did with the breadth first part. However, this is all interesting because it's all about iteration, but something that comes up all of the time in software development, in computer science in particular, is we end up seeing recursion. And file folder hierarchies can be traversed with recursion. So if you're interested in seeing how that works, you can check out this video next when it's uploaded. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.